So Lizzie, I'm so excited to welcome you to Episcopal Campus Ministry at the Chapel of the Cross at UNC, ECM. We have students here from all over the country and all over North Carolina, but we are thrilled to have you with us here from Austin, Texas. You are a transitional deacon, but you have some connections and roots back to Chapel Hill and other parts nearby that you might choose to share with us as you're leading us through this process, through this invitation of painting and prayer. So I will leave the rest of the time to you to introduce us and introduce yourself more and take us on this journey of art and connecting our hearts and minds and bodies and souls with God's invitation to know that we are loved and for us to be expressions of God's love in the world. Take it away, Lizzie.
Oh, well, thank you, Chaplain. Hi, y'all. I'm Lizzie. It's really lovely to be with all of you, and so lovely to be so connected with Chapel Hill. I grew up in Chapel Hill, and my spouse went to UNC, and then traitorously, we both went to Duke for our masters. I hope you don't hold it too against me, especially because y'all creamed us this week. So I literally watched the basketball game to make that joke. I'm not a sporty person, but I feel connected now. So it's such a joy to be with you all. I am here to talk about my favorite way to pray. I think one of the things about prayer is that I think we often bring our ideas of prayer in really big ways to the act of praying, and sometimes that can kind of get in our own way, right? And as Episcopalians, we have the liturgy to rely on, which is certainly something that I draw upon because I need other words sometimes to help me connect with God. But I also sometimes need to, and this is a way I started praying when I was in undergrad, sometimes I need to get the words out of the way to really connect with God on this like sort of instinctual level. And for me, that has always been through art. And I was not an art major. I studied religion and gender studies and sociology in college. I just had great K through 12 art teachers. And then when I was in divinity school, I helped pay my way through by teaching art in bars, which was a wild experience, let me tell you. And nothing really prepares you for ministry like teaching kindergartners or bachelorette parties. But art for me is not about perfection. So I just want to kill that darling right now. This is not about something perfect. This is not about something that necessarily you're going to post on your cute Instagram story, although maybe you will, right? This is something, a process I like to think of as a divine surrender, right? And not a surrender that's like creepy and patriarchal, like a surrendering to a connection with God that allows us to realize that we get to co-create with God, that God is constantly inviting us into this beautiful relationship that is wild and beautiful and unexpected and messy and mistakes are made. But in the end, all of that is something that I think God hangs up on our fridge and says, isn't that beautiful? I'm so proud of you. Thank you for this macaroni necklace, you know? So that is the spirit with which we are entering into this evening. So one of my artist inspirations for this is Morgan Harper Nichols. I've just put a link to her Instagram in the chat. I see you, Maggie. Yeah, I love her too. And she's like just the loveliest person, and I think does really beautiful art and is herself a Christian, and like a Christian on the internet in a not scary way, which I certainly appreciate. Thank you, Sally. I see you giggling. So I would love to get to know all of you a little bit, and I'm aware that we are pressed for time. So if you have a moment, if you would just drop in the chat something that you do to practice self-care right now. And this does not have to be fancy. Like it could literally be eating your vegetables. It could be taking delicious bubble baths, like whatever it is that you're doing to practice self-care. I would just love to see those. Cross-stitching, yeah. Painting, oh good, Rebecca, great. You're already adult coloring pages, rad. Playing guitar, knitting, I'm assuming watching The Office, not being in the office, Eden. Yeah, cool. Refusing to do homework on Sundays. Hannah Nelson, my queen. Yes, we applaud those boundaries. Practicing cooking skills, showering, yes. Extra snacks, yes. yoga, time with pets, face mask, pudding cups. Abigail, can you tell me what pudding cups are? That is, I'm so intrigued.
They're just cups of pudding that you can get in the grocery store. Like they're near like the yogurts, and no, they're near the applesauces.
Okay, so literally eating pudding. I didn't know if this was like me being like almost 30 and now out of touch, and this was like referencing something. So yes, here for a cup of pudding. Listening to audiobooks, yes. Weekly D&D games with friends, love it. Also Dungeons and Dragons. Oh my gosh, I know I'm among Episcopalians. I am just so here for all of this. Well, I hope that this can be an offering of self-care for you tonight. So as we're going through this, there'll be times where I say, hey, this is a good moment to pay attention. I'm going to demonstrate something. But if you want to turn your camera off and keep yourself on mute and put on a cool playlist, like this process is meant to be gentle and co-creative. So I invite you to enter into this time with a little bit of that spirit of self-care. Maybe not a little bit, maybe like a whole heaping dollop of it, in fact. So we are going to do something like this. Can you read these words? Is Zoom doing its fancy thing where it's, okay, cool. So this is an example I made of an idea. So we're going to start with our watercolor pencils, and we're going to do a wash or a design on our pieces of paper. So go ahead and grab your pencils and just pick a color. Now, if you wanted to do like a scene, you want to do some like cool trees or a mountain or something like that. I'm trying to see if I've got like a little example. Like if you're wanting to, oh, well, this is very fancy. This is Bob Ross waterfall. You can go for that. I'm going to go a little abstract because I find watercolor as a medium and watercolor pencils in particular to be a process that balances this tension of surrender, because sometimes you don't know where the water is going to go, right? And you don't know how it's going to blur and mess things up, right? And a process of some precision. And so one example, if you look really closely here, so this I did by using two colors and drawing a circle, and you can see some of the lines still, but you can also see how that color starts to bleed out. So I think that's a good example of the sort of depth and variety of textures you can have with watercolor pencils. So the side that feels really smooth, don't use that side. Use the side that feels a little more textured. What we're going to start with is just putting a wash of color on the page. And you can either do that by like literally, okay, can you all see this? I'm going to do this backwards. So kind of just like going back and forth and just getting a little bit of color, or you can start doing something a little bit more specific. You can also do, I'm really into circles right now. Maybe it's like a visual metaphor of spiraling in like the best way possible. Now, just like you can see on the page, right here, I was going really light with my pencil. That's going to be a light color when I put water on it. When I'm pressing, when I have more pressure on my pencil, that's going to be a darker color, and that's also going to offer more definition. So we're going to take about 10 minutes or so and just start filling this page with whimsy, with color, with mountains. Y'all in North Carolina have real mountains. I mean, we do in Texas too, but I have yet to see them in my 3 years of living here. I miss the Blue Ridge so much. And remember, this is not about perfection, right? This is not something we're submitting to the MoMA. So be playful with it and surprise yourself. I'm going to mute myself, so if you want to put on some music in your room or whatever, and I'll draw your attention when we're ready to move on to the next step. I realized I did say it'd be 10 minutes, but just in case you're feeling fancy, and I seriously mean just if you're feeling fancy, you can take one of your brushes and dip it in the water as you're doing this wash process and start to incorporate the water in this step. If you're like, that feels a little too much right now and I'm really enjoying coloring my swirls or my mountains or whatever you're doing, don't worry about it. Because once you've got some water on the page, you can totally draw on top of it, but it's gonna make the textures a little bit less intuitive to work with unless you've done this before. But that is just an option if you want to go ahead and start playing with that texture. Okay, now I really will mute myself. As you're coming along with this, you want to be getting to a point now where your page is getting pretty full. And if you're like super vibing with this and you want to like do a really involved painting or drawing, then you do you, okay? You do not have to keep pace with the group. But I'm just gonna keep moving us a little bit forward so y'all can see kind of what's coming. So this is about where I am as an example. So that is a balance of drawn like squiggly doos and washes of paint. And at this point, I would definitely encourage you, if you're at this place of like your canvas is, your paper is starting to get a little full. Mine's kind of, well, this is the fun thing about water. So I'm holding it up and you can see that like gravity is like starting to affect the painting because it's starting to pull some of that color down because of the water. So this is that whole process of surrender. This is the point where I invite you to start letting go a little bit, because you may really love that little squiggly do you've just done, and adding water to it is gonna change it. Another thing you can do is you can add a little bit of water onto your picture, and then take one of your pencils. I'm gonna demonstrate now. And I'm gonna get a little bit of water on my pencil, and I'm gonna start doing another layer. I'm sorry, you can't see that. Another layer on top. And this is actually making that paint, I'm gonna hold this up really close, more paint-like. It's a little bit thicker. It's a little, we're kind of moving from a pencil texture into a painting texture there. So it layers really nicely. Another thing you can do, probably not too close to your laptop. So I'm gonna try, I'm gonna tilt this down so y'all can see. So I've dipped my brush in some water. I'm just gonna flick it. And that just gets little droplets of water. So if you're doing like a cool night sky kind of thing, that's a fun thing to do. And then one other option is if you've got some plastic wrap or like a sandwich bag. The plastic is key here because of the way it crinkles. So I'm going to take this tiny little piece here. I'm going to stretch it out as much as I can so that it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to put it on top and then just kind of crinkle it on the piece of paper. And if you have a lot of water and a lot of paint texture, that's really going to show up. And then take it off. So now that looks a little messy, right? That does not look nearly as neat as what I had going for me before. It's starting to blur a little bit. You can also take your plastic and kind of dab it. You could also do this with like an old toothbrush. I mean, you can do this with salt and just like play with the texture and just like see and experiment with what might emerge for you. If you're sort of keeping pace with this, start playing with that texture. And don't be afraid to get really bold with the water. Don't be afraid to mess around with different brushes. So I've been using my flat brush, now I'm using my little narrow brush. One of the things about doing like abstract layered art like this is that sometimes the first layer you're like, dang, I really love how that blending looks, or I really love this particular shade of teal. And so there's this kind of like moment where you're like, I don't know if I want to layer on top of that. And sometimes it's a good thing to lean into, right? Sometimes that's a moment of fullness. But sometimes I think in the life of faith, we take risks, right? And sometimes those risks pay off and sometimes they don't. But I find almost always, not every time, but almost always, when I really love my, what's called an undercolor, if you're getting really fancy, that like first wash of paint, that it actually only adds beauty and depth and complexity to every layer I put on top of it. And it just makes the whole picture more full when I choose to add more layers, which I think is a process of surrendering, right? Like it's a process of saying, okay, I may really love what this color looked like at first, but I really love what it looks like when it's incorporated with all these other colors, which I often find when I'm praying and talking to God about like really difficult things in my life. For me, there's a lot of I want to hold on to things. I really love holding on to being right. I really don't like being wrong. I see some nodding. And sometimes I just feel like Jesus is all up in my business. And I'm like, dang it, this last color looks so good, but I had to let go of the first 3 layers of color to get there, you know, or I had to cover them up. All right, y'all, keep finishing that up. So once you get to a point where you feel like your canvas, your picture is sufficiently covered, and again, I'll hold mine up close to the camera so y'all can see. I've got a lot of texture, got a lot of layers, just got a lot going on, which this kind of matches my sweater, and I just realized that, and like clearly I'm just in a pink mood today. So when your canvas starts to feel a little damp, that's a good moment to give it a second to dry. So while it is drying, I am going to invite you to meditate with me on a particular passage of scripture. This is probably like if the Bible had a top 40, this is absolutely in the top 5 greatest hits of all time. This comes from the Apostle Paul's first epistle, first letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And, you know, as a lady in ministry, there have been plenty of times when good old St. Paul has been quoted to justify some really harmful practices in Christianity, right? But I am in the business of believing that God makes all things new, and that even Paul, whom I certainly did not love when I was getting my bachelor's in religion, has a redemptive word. And when Paul was writing this epistle to the church in Corinth, they were a mess, y'all. The church in Corinth was an absolute mess. They were so fractured and so divided, and they were divided along wealth lines. The most marginalized among them were not being included in the absolute heart of the church, and Paul was super angry about that. And so a lot of the letter, a lot of 1 Corinthians is Paul just like popping off on some rich people being like, that is not the gospel, get it together. And in the middle of all of this comes this like, you know, sort of top 40 Christian moment that I think sometimes in its overusage, we forget just how revolutionary this love ballad is. Because the thing about love, and especially as we're coming up on Valentine's Day, and Rebecca, was it you earlier who talked about Fun Dip and how you wish like elementary school Valentine's Day was still a thing?
Yeah, that was me. My mom's an elementary school teacher, so.
Yes, I'm with you and your mom. Like, I just want to make a cute little mailbox and get cute little love notes from everybody in the classroom. Like, why don't we still do that? And so one of the ways that I think we can give that like elementary school vibe to ourselves is to remember, first of all, that like love is not just romantic love, right? Love is not just about finding a partner or a soulmate, but love is actually this deep revolutionary call from God that, you know, justice is what love looks like in public. I think it was Cornel West who said that, right? And love is also something that I think is always at the heart of God's desire for us to spend time with God. And so I'm just going to read to you with that in mind, all of 1 Corinthians 13. So keep painting away, but if you're getting to a point where your canvas is starting to get a little damp, you're starting to reach some fullness, you're going to want to pause because we do want this to dry before the next step. If I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. if I give away everything that I have and hand over my body to feel good about what I've done, but I don't have love, I receive no benefit whatsoever. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love does not brag. Love is not arrogant. Love is not rude. Love does not seek its own advantage. Love is not irritable. Love does not keep a record of complaints. Love is not happy with injustice. Love is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things. Love trusts in all things. Love hopes for all things. Love endures all things. Love never fails. As for prophecies, they will be brought to an end. As for tongues, they will stop. As for knowledge, it will be brought to an end. We know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, which is what is partial, will be brought to an end. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child. But now that I've become an adult, I've put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will know completely in the same way that I have been completely known. Now in faith, hope, and love remain these three things, and the greatest of these is love. That's the Common English Bible with a little Lizzie paraphrasing. So with this in mind, as much as this passage is like used in Hallmark cards to give to couples on their wedding day or whatever, like Paul, first of all, was not married. Second of all, this is about a community, right? This is about a community and a call in a time of great division to remember the center, and the center being love. And so in a time when our country feels really divided, when maybe we're experiencing a lot of division in our home lives, I don't know about y'all, but being locked up with my parents for 12 months does not sound like a ton of fun. And I love my spouse more than anything in the world, but oh my gosh, there have definitely been moments in the last 12 months where I'm like, I would really use like a break from your face. So, right, there's a lot of division, right? And sort of these big meta, like political levels, but also in these small ways and in these really, well, not small, on a smaller scale perhaps, but really big and present ways. And so I want us to turn this prayer painting into a love note for ourselves, drawing some inspiration from 1 Corinthians 13, because God says we are called to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And I think a lot of times we focus a lot on loving our neighbor, which is really good, but we've also got to love ourselves. And so this Valentine's Day, when we're having to observe all these social distancing protocols, which are like good for the common good, but are just hard, right? It's really hard to be apart. It's really hard to constantly be on Zoom. It's really hard to deal with all the sort of different parts moving in our lives. I want you to see, and I put it in the chat, this list of different aspects of love. And I'll read it again. Love is patient. I'm sorry, before I read it again, let me say, I want you to listen for one phrase, or maybe two, that is just really landing with you. And maybe it's landing with you because it's something you're like, wow, I really want to practice that more. Or maybe it's landing with you because you're like, yeah, that's really true. And what I don't want you to listen for is something that makes you feel ashamed, okay? This is a shame-free zone. I do not believe God is in the business of shaming us into liberation. And so listen for something that feels like a balm, like a salve. So I offer to you again, 1 Corinthians 13, simply the love part. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love isn't jealous. Love doesn't brag. Love isn't arrogant. Love isn't rude. Love does not seek its own advantage. Love is not irritable. Love does not keep a record of complaints. Love is not happy with injustice. Love is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Love never fails. And so as your canvas is drying, and this may be the part where you go get your blow dryer if you've got one, and you dry it a little faster, or you know, if you've ever been to a nail salon, you've done this, you know, you use some of this motion, which also may play around with your texture, also a part of surrender. I want you, or I invite you rather, to choose just one of these phrases. So earlier, I was thinking I need to remember that love is kind. And so I wrote, this is just Sharpie, but like whatever pen you've got, as long as your surface is dry, will show up on top of this. I will say this is like, I feel like the most regular kind of Sharpie. This is probably the best if you're going to do just one little phrase, 3 words. You may want a slightly thinner Sharpie or pen or marker, or you could even use, you know, one of your darker watercolors. So my darkest one is purple. To write that phrase on top of this color wash we did underneath. And I invite this to be a love note to yourself. And maybe this is a word of love that God is speaking to you right now, or maybe it's simply a phrase that you are receiving from the depth of God who lives within you, speaking to you. So that's in the chat. Take a second, look it over, think about which phrase you want, maybe go grab your blow dryer and dry. Mine is still a little wet right here, so I'm going to get a little creative with our lettering. And then I'm going to show you in a second how I'm going to do my lettering as an example. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything they want to share?
I think that's a passage that's really easy just to gloss over. And I really want to appreciate your both contextualizing it and really breaking it up and making it clear that that is I've preached on that passage many times, as you say, at weddings, and often it's a reintroduction that it's not just these, you know, it's not just these words to a couple, it's actually to the whole community. And I also want to appreciate your invitation to consider the thing that you need to grow into or lean into, or to consider the thing you need to receive, the kind of love you need to receive from God today. And I think that was a really beautiful offering and breaking open of that scripture in a way that isn't always what we first think of when we hear this passage.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chaplain Mary Kat. I very deliberately, we did not have this read in our wedding, which, like, I think is a beautiful text for weddings, right? Like, there's no shade or shame. But I just, you know, it is about couple love, but Paul's very single when he's writing it, you know? All right, y'all. So I'm going to show you my canvas is, my paper is dry enough. Okay, I'm going to do this backwards. So this is embracing some surrender. This may not look as beautiful as I want it to be, and I'm just going to let that go. So I am feeling personally really drawn to this love isn't jealous piece, which I think for me is that, like, love begets love, right? That love is not pie, just like justice is not pie. Just because I love one person doesn't mean I, like, don't have any love left over to share, right? And that I think true and deep, bountiful love is just, I am not endless, but God's love is endless. And y'all probably are hearing some really lovely sirens behind me. So may God bless and keep whomever they are coming to tend to. So I'm going to try with my Sharpie here. Woo, yep, that's not looking the way I want it to, but that's still a little wet, but that's okay. And then this is super wet down here, so I'm going to do my best with it. So that's what the rough cut looks like. So because I want that to be more visible, I'm going to go in, I'm going to like bold it, right? So if this, I'm going to, you know, I was about to make a joke about bolding it in like a Word document, but I couldn't see the punchline. So the thing with hand lettering, if you want to get really fancy with it, is you just want to think about where is the spine of each letter. And you want the spines to be, in this case, at least decently all on the same side. So I'm going to choose the left side. So here's the spine of my L. So I'm going to come down and I'm making a parallel line. Do that again with my O. I'm trying to do it in such a way that you can see. I'm also going to try and round out this little sharp bottom. So you see how I've thickened the spine? Do y'all see that? I'll do it again on the V. And on the E, and I've done them all on the left side, just so that it's sort of consistently thick on one side, which just helps our eye when we're reading it. And then I'm just going to come in, I'm just going to color it in. This is like the really easy coloring bit. You fill it in. I'm also going to fill in this O a little bit up here. Give her a little hat. And there we go. See how that love is a lot easier to read now that I've bolded it up. So the last thing I'll show here is how to do some hand lettering that I'm just going to do a little close up on this. So the thing, if you want to do hand lettering like this, which you can just do your normal handwriting, but you want to find the spine of each letter and you want them to mostly be on the same side if possible. So I chose the left here, so see the left, 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 left. And sometimes that spine is really obvious. Like with an L, you're going to do it on this long piece. With the E, you're going to do it on this long piece. But with a V, you know, I had two choices of which one I wanted to make thick. But to make it visually kind of consistent, I kept it on the left side. Now here with this A, because there's kind of two spines, I'm going to make this little curly bit thicker and this bit thicker. This is actually an L, and I'm going to make it look a little more like an L because I did it holding it up and wasn't able to give it its curl. But you just come in and see how making it thicker just makes it pop a little bit more. And there you go. Now, the artist who I recommended at the top, Morgan Harper Nichols, she plays around with this a lot. So if you've got like some negative space, so some, like if you've got a lot of color and then a little bit of like less color, that's a good spot to put even like smaller letters too, right? An example, it doesn't have to be all big and bold. And I like to do this sometimes with, every time actually I'm preaching, I call this my 21st century version of an illuminated manuscript. So I'll take the text that I'm preaching on, and you can do this for like a text you're just curious to study about, or a prayer, right? The great gift of like Compline, right? Is that we say the same prayers over and over, and they kind of start to live in us, right? Like the Lord's Prayer is another one of those great examples. And if I'm really struggling with, I'll take the Lord's Prayer, for example, a particular phrase or a particular moment or image. So for me, sometimes that was saying Our Father, which is also why I now go by Father Lizzie in some circles, just because I like to subvert some linguistic norms. But for a long time, I really was struggling with that Our Father, or I was struggling with as we forgive those who sin against us or trespass against us, or our debtors, right? Depending on, you know, what kind of language lives in your spirit. I know not everybody grows up Episcopalian saying the same things. I certainly did not. I will write that phrase out, or I'll make it look as visually beautiful as possible, just to behold the complexity, right? Because sometimes the things that really trouble us, they really trouble us because they're wrong and we need to confront them, right? Like misogyny. But sometimes there's also something beautiful to understanding, you know, God is not bound by gender. God is gender nonconforming. God is bigger than gender, but God also is embodied, like, and has come to us as a father and as a mother and as a creator and as a nonconforming parent, right? But like I had to really sit with, especially before making my ordination vows, like being the one up front who's saying Our Father, right? So that was one of my practices to hold the complexity of that. And so I offer that to you. If there's ever been a passage of scripture that you're really wrestling with, it's a lot easier to wrestle with it when it looks really nice. So I know we have just about 5 minutes left before we have a hard stop. So I'm curious if anybody would like to share, if you're feeling vulnerable, feeling bold, feeling courageous, if anybody would like to share their work and why they chose what they chose, or not, just share your work. I'd love to see.
I could share a little bit of mine. So I did continue with the crescent moon moment. I don't know if you can read it, but it says divine. I kind of went off a little bit on my own way, but I don't know, the word kind of came to me, and I've been struggling with like spirituality and like connecting that to how I communicate with God. And what you said like about like the non-binary creator and like bringing that in, it just was really beautiful to me, and it spoke to me. And I think that that in itself is like divine, and I wanted to represent that.
Tori, thank you so much for sharing. It's beautiful. And I'm so glad you went your own way with it. And I love the crescent moon and your letters. I love how it's like this, like the movement of both sides to read it. It's like this all encompassing. And I hear when you talk about like the non-binary creator breaking open gender, breaking open a binary, it's beautiful, and seeing what is in between. I love that. Would anybody else like to share?
I could. I directly followed the instructions because we've talked about this with this group before, but for those of you that have taken the Enneagram test, I'm a type 1. So I do everything to the T. I have to follow the directions, otherwise I don't like it. So I said, I made this. It's kind of hard to see, I'm realizing, but I did it based off of my phone case because I like the way my phone case looks. And I did the phrase that said, love puts up with all things, because I think I've been struggling a lot with putting up with all things these days, especially due to the pandemic. And it's just a good reminder that, like, you know, sometimes if you're not putting up with things, maybe it's because it's not where your passion lies, or you're not giving it the love it deserves.
Wow, Lauren, that's some deep wisdom. You are the direction I integrate to. I'm an Enneagram 4, if that wasn't patently obvious. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for following the rules, and in that finding some freedom to hold all the things. Anybody else, if you want to raise your hands or just unmute, go for it.
I'll share. So like Tori, I went a little bit off script.
I love it.
Thank you. It says love doesn't brag. And so I live in I grew up in Asheville. And so when you were talking about the Blue Ridge Mountains, I was like, I miss the mountains too. And so I try, there's a little bit. And so this was also with what Tori was saying about integrating just like an all powerful being. I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, but this could also be like almost portrayed as like a Mother Earth like figure inside of the mountains. And I think it's part of just like the academic environment at Chapel Hill, but like bragging is a very big part of the culture here. And so I think sometimes I have to remind myself that bragging is not the way to go. So.
Rebecca, thank you so much for that courage and that beauty and the mountains. I feel blessed by all of that. And I think such a deep wisdom of, love does not brag. That's a hard one for me too. And I hope you feel some blessing and some life in that.
So we have hit our typical closing time, but why don't we have a closing prayer, a sending prayer from you, Rev Lizzie? And I just want to remind everybody, especially the rule followers, love never fails. So love is the one that is the power of the universe that fills in all the gaps between you and me, all the gaps bridges I can't build, the people that are broken in ways that I can't fix, and the ways that I'm broken, God fills in. all of the gaps with that love. Love never fails. So all we have to do is do our part in receiving it and accepting it. So thank you so much, Lizzie, and I would invite you to pray us out.
Absolutely. I will pray us out, and I'll stick around for 15 minutes or so if y'all just want to share pictures, chat, all of it. So this closing prayer comes from one of my favorite saints, Saint Teresa of Avila. The Lord be with you. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. So let us go forth in the name of Christ, rejoicing in the power of the Spirit. Alleluia, alleluia.
Thanks be to God. Alleluia, alleluia.